Thousands of acres of a wildlife conservancy in central Kenya have recently been destroyed by fire, said to have been started by British troops training in the region. Now, this is not the first time British troops in Kenya have been involved in criminal acts. Many women in Kenya have been raped by British troops in the country, as this victim here explains.
The British soldiers, the Johnnies, they came. They raped us from 1960s up to date. And we have their children, even of 9 months.
Hello, I'm Mubarak Kenya, and a warm welcome to this week's edition of Africa Today. In the first part of our program, we are focusing on crimes that have been committed by British troops in Kenya over the last 5 decades. In the second segment of our program, we shall move to the West African state of Mali, where another European power, France, is killing civilians with impunity. Stay with us till the end, as our experts will be analyzing reasons behind the continued crimes by these former colonial powers against the people of Africa.
British Army crimes in Kenya. More than 10,000 acres of the Loldaiga Conservancy in central Kenya have recently been destroyed in a fire started by British troops training in Kenya. This conservancy is home to many animals, including critically endangered species. The conservancy is being used as training grounds by British soldiers under the British Army Training Unit in Kenya. British Army Training Unit in Kenya is a permanent training support unit based mainly in Nanyuki, 200 kilometers north of Nairobi. There was uproar in Kenya after a British soldier boasted on social media that he started the fire that also killed elephants.
British troops in Kenya have been accused of committing other crimes, including raping local women and also leaving unexploded mines that have killed and injured many Kenyans. For analysis on crimes by British troops in Kenya, we are joined today by Dr. Mordecai Ogada, an ecologist and conservation writer. He's also the co-author of the book, The Big Conservation Lie, and is currently the executive director of Conservation Solutions Africa. We also have Dr. Firoz Manji, who is an author, activist, and a professor of African Studies at Carleton University. He's also a publisher at Daraja Press. Now, thank you, gentlemen, and let's start off with Dr. Ogada. The British Ministry of Defence states in its website that one of the reasons for the UK Army deployment in Africa is increasing the capabilities of local park rangers to protect elephants from poachers in the illegal wildlife trade. Now, Dr. Ogada, what's your take on the claims by the British Army that one of its objectives is to protect elephants in Africa, while one of its soldiers bragged on social media about how he caused a huge fire that destroyed a virgin forest and killed wildlife, including elephants in Kenya?
Okay, first of all, the reason they give for the reason they give for their presence, as in the conservation part of it, that's a complete fallacy. There is no way a soldier from England can have anything to teach a local indigenous Kenya Wildlife Service ranger about tracking either criminals or animals through the bush. So there's no knowledge they're imparting there.
Thank you for that, Dr. Ogada.
British Army crimes in Kenya are not limited to igniting forest fires and killing wildlife. According to estimates by local and international human rights organizations, at least 650 women had been raped by British troops in Kenya, what has been termed as an epidemic of rape. Those impregnated by their rapists gave birth to children that are of a lighter color than native children. One of the victims recounts her ordeal at the hands of British troops and what befell her thereafter. In 2007, Kenyans reacted angrily to a report by Britain's Defense Ministry, which claimed there was no reliable evidence to support charges its soldiers raped hundreds of women in the East African country. Some of the victims protested, demanding justice, while walking with children born following incidents of rape by British troops.
We want justice! We want justice! We want justice! We want justice!
Now, let's bring in our guest who is based in Canada. Dr. Firoz Manji, many Kenyan women have been raped by British troops over the last 5 decades and have been unable to get compensation or even apologies from Britain. Is there still hope for justice for these forsaken victims of rape?
What we have is a situation which is fundamentally an expression of a form of racism. Imagine that these were white women who had been raped by black troops. How would the media have responded on that? How would the whole issue of compensation would have been addressed? The fact is, our people in Africa are seen as less than human. And so if you're less than human, then you don't get the same kind of rights that white people would have. And in this case, if it had been white women who had been raped, there would have been an uproar of extraordinary proportions. The fact that it is constantly, always black Kenyan women who are being raped, that is a cause for real concern.
Very sad indeed. Dr. Firoz Manji there from the Raja Press.
In Kenya, the British Army trains with live ammunition. Many locals, including women and children, have been maimed and killed by the ordnance the troops leave behind. Let's take a look.
It affects us in the sense that people are killed, and when life is lost, definitely that's an effect that nobody can even measure. The other thing is others are reduced to be hopeless people who cannot even work for themselves. And the worst of all is that this thing is done against their own wishes. People come and train on their own land without recognition of the fact that this is a private land. They come as well and don't even clean up the ranges. They leave the ordinances without giving any explanation.
Following intense pressure, the British government compensated some of the victims. However, the amount received by the victims was far below what they deserved after their lives were completely destroyed.
Dr. Manji, many Kenyans have also been killed or injured by ordnance, including mines left by British troops training in Kenya. After filing official complaints in London, they were compensated. Now, do you think the compensation was enough for the victims?
Clearly not. And again, I just want to draw on the analogy I just made to the previous question. Had these been white people who had been killed by ordnance, by mines which had been planted, there would have been an outrage and the compensation would be completely different. And so we have an issue that you have an imperial colonial form of power that is able to carry out these kind of things and not be held accountable. Impunity is a long tradition of the British.
Now, back to you, Dr. Ogada. What, in your opinion, is the real reason behind the presence of British troops in Kenya?
Right now, conservation is the strongest tool of the new colonization, the new wave of colonization in the world. So this creates a situation where we have new, what I call micro-colonies that are they're not necessarily countries, but they are spaces within countries. And I think this deployment of soldiers is to protect the spaces that have already been acquired by conservation for whatever reason. So I think we need to look more closely into this, because if we are honest, military people do not have any place in the arena of environmental conservation.
Now, our last question to you, Dr. Ogada. What do you think is the solution for this issue of conservancies and British troops' presence in Kenya?
The solution, first of all, is to reverse the militarization of conservation. Remove all militaries from any country from conservation. That they have no place in conservation, because conservation is about people. It's not about animals in absence of people. And the second thing is that we have to enforce or recognize the rights and knowledge of indigenous people.
Thank you for that insight, Dr. Ogada. Now, before we wind up our interview, Professor Manji, what do you think is the reason behind the long-standing British military presence in Kenya?
The reality is the British Army has been present in Kenya for decades. When you talk about independence, what independence led to was the establishment of neo-colonialism. We are still following the same traditions that were established 100 years ago under colonialism. And so what we have now is a situation in which our government, our elites in Kenya, actually collude in allowing these foreign troops to be based in Kenya and to have an impunity for all the crimes that they commit. Well, we have a neo-colonial situation. We are still occupied by imperial troops, and it's the same with the American troops who are also present.
Thank you very much, Dr. Firoz Manji of the Raja Press, for your insight on the presence of British troops in Kenya. Well, let's go for a short break, and when we come back, we'll talk about how the French army is killing civilians in Mali. Don't go away.
French army killing Mali civilians.
United Nations investigators have said that a French air attack in January killed at least 19 civilians at a wedding party in central Mali. Now, this UN report confirmed locals' account while contradicting France's version that only rebel fighters were killed. The Human Rights Division of the United Nations mission in Mali, known as MINUSMA, says it visited the village of Bounty, where the attack took place on the 3rd of January. It said 19 people, including 16 civilians and 3 armed men who were attending the wedding, were killed immediately in the air attack, while 3 more civilians died while being transferred to medical care. The UN report was welcomed by human rights activists in Mali.
Thank God the MINUSMA has just published its report, giving us 100% certainty. Because we reported from the beginning that 19 victims were killed, all Fulani civilians. Today, the report confirms that there were 19 civilians killed by the Bakan force.
Since 2014, French military forces have been deployed in Mali under the cover of an operation called Barkhane to reportedly fight against armed groups in the Sahel. There are around 5,000 French troops across the Sahel region. However, their presence is not welcomed by all Malians, especially after the recent killings of several civilians in airstrikes by the Barkhane forces.
To discuss about the recent French military crimes in Mali, we contacted Moustapha Traoré, an academic, political analyst, and the founder of anopeneye.org, Thank you for your time, Mr. Traore.
Always a pleasure.
Now, Mr. Traore, French troops are under probe for indiscriminately killing civilians in Mali recently. This is clearly not the first time French troops are killing civilians stationed in this West African country. What's your take on this level of impunity?
There's this attempt from the French to try to recolonize the African continent. The situation we are living in today in France is very similar to a war. This is Macron who said it. We are at war. And think about, in the case of war, what France has always done. France has never won a war without the help of its colonies. So the situation is the same here. Economically, France is kneeling today. The only possibility for the French economy to recover is through the exploitation of the African continent. And this is what they have just started with the African continent. You've got the military presence of the French military is present in many countries in the African continent. There's just one objective. In all the places you have the French army, there's no peace.
Thanks for that, Mr. Traore of anopeneye.org.
French Minister of the Armed Forces Florence Parly visited Mali early April and defended an airstrike by his country's forces in the African country.
All the fundamental principles aimed at preserving civilians have been applied. And I strongly reaffirm that on January 3rd, the French armed forces targeted a terrorist group that had been formally identified as such.
The French government is defending crimes committed by its troops in Mali, even after the UN confirmed civilians were killed. Why is France refusing to accept responsibility for crimes committed by its forces?
Because it is all planned. This is the reason why they refuse to accept it. And if they recognize it, it means that they will have to change their policy towards Mali, in Mali. Is that possible? Can France change its policy towards Mali? I'm not sure. It's not in their interest. Freedom in Mali, elections in Mali, peace in Mali is not in the interest of France, because it means that the Malians are going to enjoy their own resources. And this cannot happen. France is not going to allow this to happen. So they've got to create chaos. They've got to justify their presence. So this military attack on civilians was all planned. They knew about it. Okay. So it took time for the Malians to first to contest, and then for the UN to investigate. And now we have the truth, and they are still denying the truth.
The UN report on French forces killing civilians in Mali constitutes a rare criticism of the actions of French forces in this fragile West African state. This move by the UN raised hope among rights campaigners that the culprits will be brought to book.
There are many good people working on this, and even the United Nations. The UN should go further and identify the culprits and see how to name and arrest those responsible.
What possible legal action can be taken by the families of victims or the government in Mali to compel France to compensate victims and charge the perpetrators of this crime?
I think it all depends on the population, the Malian population. So what the Malians have to do is demonstrate, is to ask for their rights. And if they make some noise, if they demonstrate, if they protest, the government of Mali will have to move. But the way the army is moving in Mali seems that they are just following the French. They are just listening to the French and trying to put into place what the French government is saying. Okay. Very recently, we have a representative of the French army coming to Mali. Why is that she came to Mali? Okay, just after the UN revealed the attack on civilians.
The United Nations Special Rapporteur for Extrajudicial Killings recently accused the French military of hampering an investigation into the murder of 2 journalists in Mali in 2013. Now, Mr. Traoré, why is the French military blocking the probe into the murder of these French journalists, and why were they targeted?
It's because they wanted to reveal some of the things that were happening in northern Mali. That's the only reason. So we've got to help the journalists. I know that they are organized. They've got their own organization, associations. So we've got to help them find the truth. It's very important to know exactly the conditions in which these 2 journalists were assassinated. Okay, they were assassinated in a kind of zone that was more or less controlled by the French or the partners of the French. That's very important.
Well, that's a damning revelation about ongoing French crimes in West Africa. Now, Mr. Traoré, can you tell us why are these destabilizing activities by France currently centered on Mali?
Now, I know the risk I'm taking here by just saying this, but I'm inviting the whole world to have a look at what is happening in Mali. A genocide is happening and an attempt to recolonize Mali and West Africa. People know, all the experts know, that if you want to totally recolonize West Africa, you've got to start with Mali, because this is where you have the roots of the West African culture. Okay, and who possesses the culture possesses also the resources.
The conduct of French troops in Mali has come under sharp scrutiny. Mali's ambassador to Paris could not withstand the immoral behavior of French troops in his country. Ambassador Toumani Jim Diallo complained to the French Senate of problems caused by French troops deployed on Malian soil.
And this week's dispute comes at the tail end of a wider storm about France's military presence in that region. In January, hundreds gathered in the Malian capital in protest, with their placards reading, "France, get lost." But at talks in the Pyrenean city of Pau, just days after those rallies, President Macron secured the backing of G5 Sahel leaders to keep French boots on the ground.
Why is France intent on interfering in the internal affairs of African countries? What is really at stake?
And we keep on repeating the same thing all the time. So in times of crisis, when financially we are in big difficulties, the only thing that comes to mind to the French politicians and the leaders is Africa. Whenever France is in difficulty, first thing they do, okay, they look at Africa. Where are they going to get the money? Okay, where are they going to get the money to pay for all the expenses now? The money is not there. Of course, they've got the African currency, le franc CFA. That's one thing, but also the resources. Without the resources, France is nothing. So this is the French, I would say, trademark. Okay, so this is the French know-how. They do not know how to prosper differently. The only way of prospering in France is spoiling the African continent.
There you have it. Mr. Traoré says the only way for France to revive its economy under the current conditions is to loot the resources of Africa. Now, what do you think? Drop us a line through our social media handle. And thanks a lot for watching. Bye for now.